Hi, World History. This is Miss Corey. Welcome to U11-L7 Basics of the Age of Exploration Part 1. So make sure you do the U11-L6 web quest before the slideshow because the U11-L6 gives some basics about the Age of Exploration that I will be skipping over today. So it's important you do that first. Learning targets, analyze how caste systems based upon race, social class, and religion have been used to justify imperialism, colonization, warfare, and chattel slavery. Analyze how those caste systems and justifications have changed over time and how they influence our society today. Construct a narrative account about the emergence and expansion of indigenous societies in the Americas and our trade networks between multiple indigenous societies in the Americas using historical sources, and examine how new connections between the hemispheres resulted in biological, cultural, and technological exchanges. Evaluate who benefited from these changes and who did not. Your job, you're going to watch this Ed puzzle and answer the questions that are in blue text. You're going to answer those questions directly on the Ed puzzle. Heads up, today is going to talk about some heavy topics like racism and enslavement. We are getting into the time period from the 1500s into the modern day where pseudoscience, which is false sciences and beliefs, and societal racism come into relevance. These false and harmful ideologies will be a part of all units until the end of the semester. As always, let us know if you have any questions. All right, so first thing, name two pieces of information that you remember or stick out to you the most from U11-L6. All right, so I'm sure all of you have heard of Christopher Columbus before. So that's this dude right here. He did a voyage from Spain in 1492. He landed in the Bahamas. Some textbooks say he thought he landed in India, but this guy was not a complete idiot. He actually knew he wasn't in India because he had navigation tools and measurements of Earth's circumference to know that he was not in India. When he landed in the Bahamas, he met the Taino people. So the Taino people occupied what is modern-day Cuba, Jamaica, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. When Christopher Columbus arrived in 1492, there was about 1 to 2 million Taino people living amongst all those islands. They're an agricultural society, meaning they planted things such as yams, tobacco, cassava, and peppers. So here's a map of where the Taino people would have lived, and still live today, of course. Here's the Bahamas where Christopher Columbus landed. So the Taino people, by 1520, only a few thousand Taino people were still alive. They died by enslavement, starvation, and disease brought by Europeans. By 1550, almost all Taino peoples were wiped out. There are still Taino people today. There is no exact population number, but there are groups of these people who live in New York, Florida, New Jersey, and Puerto Rico. Online websites like this one say that Columbus found America. My question for you is, did Columbus actually found America? And why do you think that? No, of course he didn't find America. There were thousands of native tribes already calling North America home. Today, there are 574 tribes in the United States, 68 in Mexico, 826 in other Central American and Caribbean countries, and 630 tribes in Canada. And that doesn't even include South America. That's just North America. So here is a map of tribal nations. As you can see, there are many, 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 many. Here are the indigenous nations of Mexico, and then indigenous nations of the Caribbean. So there is a lot of diversity, a lot of different cultures before even the Europeans arrived that were living in the Americas. So how the natives were treated. European explorers were not traveling to make friends. They were there to steal resources, to steal land, and to oppress any natives they came by. Religion was used as a weapon. Explorers didn't give a care if the natives converted or not. They wanted natives to convert to Christianity in order to suppress their culture. A new religion meant there was going to be new rules, such as the natives having to give money to the church and obeying church hierarchy. So remember when we talked about in the Middle Ages, as well as the Renaissance, tithes and those taxes that people had to pay to the church? Well, they were still around during this time. and the natives were forced to give money to the church. Columbus had his men read out a decree to all of the Taino people in the middle of the night in Spanish, claiming four things. One, the Taino land was now part of Spain. Two, all Taino people had to convert to Christianity. Three, all Taino people were under Spanish rule. And four, anyone who defies will be killed. So, what's the problem with speaking to the natives at night and in Spanish? What do humans do at night? They typically are sleeping. There's no one around. And also in Spanish. Literally, these Spanish guys just got there. None of the Taino people know Spanish. No one does. So, Columbus also enslaved the native population. We talked about that a bit with Pizarro a few lessons ago and the forcement of giving food and working farms for the Incas. He also sent Tejanos to Spain to be sold as labor and also to show who the natives were on this new quote unquote found land. So the Europeans enslaved them to work on plantations that European explorers started. A lot of those plantations were actually sugarcane. It enslaved them to work in gold mines, and Columbus allowed his men to sexually abuse and murder Taino women. So, there are lots of other examples of the dehumanizing and unjust ways Europeans treated natives during the late 1400s, early 1500s. These were just Columbus's examples. There are going to be dozens more of conquistadors and their men coming into North and South America. All right, so conquistadors. We talked about conquistadors a few lessons ago, but I never truly defined what they are. So, what do we know about conquistadors from previous lessons? Conquistadors are an explorer from Spain who came to North America to find riches and resources. Spain was the first European country to settle the Americas. That's why a lot of the cities, especially in places like Florida, are Spanish names. They were there to also set up colonies. A colony is lands that are controlled by another farther away country. The purpose is to gain resources and claim land for glory. God, glory, and gold. So, why did European countries send explorers to North and South America? There are three reasons: God, glory, and gold. God. On the surface level, explorers wanted to, quote, save native souls and convert them to Christianity. But that wasn't the truth. The truth is they wanted to use Christianity as a mean of suppressing the natives, and those who disobeyed would get killed. The Catholic Church gave explorers money even to take over these foreign lands. Glory. European countries were in competition with each other. They had wars and battles on the mainland of Europe, but the hard part of Europe is that they were running out of resources in the mainland. So they needed to branch out and needed to steal resources from other parts of the world because the more resources meant the more powerful the country. And this is going to be the same reason when we talk about African imperialism in a different unit. And then gold. Gold means money. Money means wealth. Wealth means more power in Europe. So Central and South America had gold and other precious metals. Francisco Pizarro. So we talked about him a few lessons ago. He's a conquistador. He was the one who landed in Peru in 1532 during the Inca Empire. He had an army of about 200 Spanish men plus a few thousand native allies. We learned all this in the Great Inca Rebellion video. He captured the Inca Emperor Atahualpa, and despite Atahualpa having brought with about 30,000 unarmed men, Atahualpa was still defeated. So Pizarro captured Atahualpa, and the ransom to get Atahualpa back was that the Inca people had to fill one room of gold and two rooms of silver. The Inca actually did so. They complied with the ransom, but Pizarro killed Atahualpa anyways. All right, then let's talk about the mixing of blood. So when the Spanish conquered southern US, Mexico, Central America, and South America and settled colonies, there were no women. They didn't bring any of the women with them. So, Spanish conquistadors had babies with native women. These children and their children after that are considered mestizos or mixed. So, the Spanish practice pseudoscience and racism. Pseudoscience are practices and ideas not based on scientific studies and are mixed with racist ideologies. So, Spanish thought of their mestizo offspring as not as pure blooded Spaniards, and they treated their mestizos as subhuman. So, even though these were their children, they did not treat them as full humans. Spanish even went so far to make a hierarchy of who was more pure, depending on parents, called castas or castes. So we've seen the hierarchy triangle before in other cultures. So at the very top, we have the Peninsulares, which are Spaniards born in Spain. Below that, we have the Creoles, which are people who were born in New Spain. By the way, New Spain means North and South America, of Spanish parents. Below them are the mestizos. So they're born of Spanish and Native American Indian parents. Then we have the Native American Indians. And then on the bottom, we have the enslaved persons who are brought from Africa and the Caribbeans. So they went so far even that a artist made a painting of the hierarchy of what people should be called depending on their parents. I won't go into too much detail about it because there's a lot of layers to this. But if you're ever interested, you can look on the slides of the images of the people. Then there was also something encomienda, which translates to parcel, kind of like a parcel of land. And that's a system under the Spanish conquistadors where they forced natives and other, quote, non pure blood Spanish to farm and mine. It was mostly natives, but it could be mestizos or African descendants as well. The conquistadors promised the Spanish king and queen to treat their workers fairly, but they were big liars. They physically abused them and they forced them to work in dangerous mines. All right, that was a lot of heavy information. So let's stop for today. Wrap this up. We talked about conquistadors, colony, God, glory, and gold, Francisco Pizarro, Atalupa, mestizos, and encomienda. All right, next up, you're going to watch U11-L8, Basics of the Age of Exploration Part 2. If you have questions, comments, want to learn more, let us know. Thanks for watching. Bye.